Welcome to a short example that embraces what we've learned already throughout the series. We've looked at classes and we've looked at encapsulation. So we're going to take the basic knowledge of creating a class and the idea of encapsulation, and we're going to create a small class called calculator. And this class is going to have the ability to have numbers added to it. I'm going to leave it at adding because subtracting, dividing, multiplying, whatever is up to you. That's you can carry on and do this in your own time. We're going to save time by just doing add. Once you know how to do add, you know how to do subtract. It's relatively straightforward. But we're going to demonstrate encapsulation here because I mentioned in the last part of the tutorial that if, for example, you created a calculator application and you had a total property, you wouldn't want this total property to be accessed outside of the class itself. So you wouldn't want the ability to just modify the total on the fly. You want some kind of action, i.e. add, subtract, multiply, divide, to actually have an effect on this total. You don't want it to be able to just be changed. So if this doesn't make sense, then carry on watching and we'll create this class and we'll make it work and add some value to this, and then we'll look at how we could mess it up and how to protect against that. So the first step really is I'm going to go ahead and close product, the product class that we created, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to save this in my classes folder, and I'm going to save it as calculator.php, and the name of my class as I've named my file is going to be calculator, so class calculator. Now, let's establish what we need to use in terms of properties and methods. Well, the only property I'm going to be including here is the total. You could, however, add other properties such as pi, any constant that you want, although constants are declared slightly differently. We're not going to go into that just yet. And then we're going to create a method, essentially a function, to add a number onto this total. And then we're going to include it in index.php and start to use the calculator. So, quite an exciting application of creating a class. So, let's go ahead and define our total variable. Remember, we need a visibility modifier in front of this. So that's public. We're going to change this a bit later on because we're going to run into some problems later on with this. So public total. And that's it. I'm not going to give it a total. We could do total equals 0, but that would be pointless because we're loosely typed. We don't need to worry about setting any initial values. Okay, so public total. What do we do now? Well, we need to go ahead and create a method that's going to add a value to this total. So let's go ahead and say public, and we can leave this as public because we need it to be accessible after we've instantiated the class. So public function, remember add, we're going to call this, and we obviously need to take a parameter in here, and I'm just going to call this value. So we're essentially going to be instantiating the class, and then we're going to be adding values, and we can do this as many times as we want. Unfortunately, I've not created this so it's as flexible to pass, say, 5 parameters in. You could do that, but we'll just be sticking to the simple stuff for now, as to not confuse the overall concept here. So, public function add. Let's go ahead and determine what we need to do. Well, we need to access this. Remember this operator here. We've got a hyphen and a greater than sign, and we're accessing total. Remember, with no dollar sign, and we want to say plus equals value. Now, for anyone that's extremely new to PHP, this essentially means this equals this plus this. It's essentially adding on this value every time. However, it's much better practice to just use this operator here and just say plus equals, so we're essentially adding on value. Now we also need a method to output the total. So at the moment we can add values to this total, but we can't, well, we can access it, and that's the problem. We don't want to instantiate this, be able to add values to this total, and then access this property alone. We want, as we had in the last part of the tutorial, a getter method to get the total. So let's go ahead and create that. Public function get total, so very descriptive. And within here, essentially all we're going to do is we're going to return this total. and that's it. That's what we're going to do within this class, and that's it. Again, you can go ahead and you can add subtract a method if you like. In fact, let's go ahead and do that now quickly, and then you can go ahead and do multiply and divide. So subtract, and it's essentially just a case of minus equals instead of plus equals. So now that we've got our class, we need to go ahead and require it. Remember, we're going to use require once so we don't require it again somewhere else in our code. And this is classes / calculator.php. Let's go ahead and just refresh, check that we've got no errors. No, we'd have no errors at all, which is looking good. Okay, so now I'm going to create a variable called calc, and I'm going to make this equal to the instantiation of the class, so new calculator. Remember, we don't need the parentheses, but we're going to add them in there for good practice. Okay, so we've instantiated our calculator class. Nothing's happening at the moment, obviously, because we're not adding any values, we're not subtracting any values, and we're certainly not displaying any values out. So what do we want to do? Well, we'll go ahead and add a few values, subtract something, and then get the result. So we say calc, we access the add method, and we want to add a value. So I'm just going to say 10. So we're essentially adding 10 onto 0, because remember, total is just equal to 0 at the moment, this total here. So the result of this will now be 10. So calc get total, remember we created this, and that will essentially just return the total, so we can echo that out. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh, and 10, there we go. So we are instantiating the calculator, we're creating the object, we are adding a value to this total variable here, and using the get total method we are returning this value. Okay, so now we can go ahead and start to play around with this. So I could add 10, and then I could say add 5, and then I could subtract 2, for example. So we're going to be left with 13. So now when I refresh, you see we've got the value 13 as expected, because our add class has totaled 15 to the total, and subtract has taken away 2, so we're left with 13. Now the problem with this is that I can intercept and I can change this total variable. So I could say calc total is equal to 105. Okay, and now when this is run, we're setting this total value here, and then we're outputting this total value here. So now, instead of outputting what we have correctly added and subtracted, we're outputting 105. So we can intercept this value and we can change it. Now what happens if we don't want to allow the developer that's using our class that kind of granular control to our properties? Well, we can go ahead and change the visibility modifier. And we can change this to protected. You could of course change this to private as well if you know you're never going to extend this class, which we haven't covered yet, but once you get to that stage you'll understand where you can use protected and when you can use private. So now when I refresh, you see that we've got this fatal error, cannot access protected property, calculated total. So we're trying to directly access this property and we're not allowed, so we are forced to use this get total method. So we remove this, and the developer is only left to use this get total method, which is fine because that's the way we've designed our class, and there we are back with the original value. So that's just a short class really, that adds, subtracts. Go ahead and try and add the multiply and the divide on there. Try and write this from scratch. It will make it a lot easier to learn. And that's essentially it. We've looked at a little sample application. We've looked again at properties and methods, and we've also looked at encapsulation once again.